Hi, I'm Marcy Morrison. I'm the Associate Director of Career Development and Industry Engagement at the UC San Diego Career Center. And I'm so excited to be here today with Tommy Jung, who is a UCSD alum and also a first year at Berkeley Law and has been a huge support for me and for so many students and other alumni, helping them on their preparing to apply for law school journey. And Tommy and I decided to get together today because we see recurring themes all the time, and we wanted to dispel the myths of applying to law school. So, Tommy, you want to start off by introducing yourself, and then we'll go through the myth, break the myth.
Sure. There you go. I'm unmuted now. Uh, Thank you for having here, Marcy. It's always a pleasure to have a chance to kind of have a conversation with you and talk with you a little bit more about the law school admissions process. My name's Tommy, as Marcy introduced me. Pronouns he, him. I graduated from UC San Diego in fall of 2021, and I'm currently a first year student at Berkeley Law. And happy to be here. Happy to talk to folks outside of this I guess video now, and in terms of how you can structure your law school journey as well.
Thanks again, Tommy. So appreciate it coming to us live from Berkeley. So great. All right. So I feel, and you know this too, Tommy, from your own experience. I mean, applying to law school is really overwhelming sometimes, and so breaking it down, I think that if we put it into certain buckets, right? Things we can control, things that students and alumni can control, and things they can't control, right? That kind of helps lessen the overwhelm a little bit because then you can focus on what you can control. So would you mind starting off kicking us off with what are the things that you feel like are that they have the least control over in this process?
RC, I think that's a great question. And I think ultimately it really depends on when somebody's thinking about applying to law school. Obviously, if you're a freshman or a second year and you're thinking about law school years in the future, you might have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how things shape out. But if you're anything like me, as somebody who decided to apply to law school 6 months before, you'll probably have two categories of things that probably are more set in stone. I'm going to say the things probably that are more difficult to control and things that you have more control over. Obviously, I consult the official LSAC website in terms of all your application materials, but generally, to give a brief overview of what you should be thinking about, in the bucket of things that are more set in stone, you have things like your GPA and your transcripts. So when you're applying for law school, one of the things you'll have to do is you'll have to send over your transcript to the Law School Admissions Council. And that process is something that can take multiple weeks. And this is a trap that I see a lot of students fall into where they'll work on other parts of the application that they have more flexibility with, but not submit their transcript early enough. And they're just waiting at a certain point for a green check mark to appear on their application. And by that time, they're either a few weeks behind the actual deadline or the deadline that they had set for themselves. So your GPA and transcripts, obviously, because of the classes that you take and because they take over a much longer period of time, is something that's probably going to be more set in stone by the time you apply. So I want to emphasize that because it's something that you can take care of quite easily. It's as simple as going onto Parchment and sending it over to LSAC, but it's something that I think a lot of people, because there's so many moving parts to the law school admissions process, can forget about. So that's the first thing I want to talk about there. The second thing I want to talk about is letters of recommendation. So similar to GPA, similar to your transcript, this is something that oftentimes you can't really do by yourself because it depends on your recommender. And building relationships with professors, with student organization folks, or with your employers might be something that takes a longer period of time as well. Your GPA and your letters of recommendation, I can't recommend this enough, is something that you want to take care of as early as possible. And especially when it comes to letters of recommendation, the LSAC portal allows you to keep them in your pocket for up to 5 years, which means even if you're not thinking about applying immediately after you graduate or while you're in school, you can definitely get them when your performance is fresh in your professor's minds. It's as simple as putting together a short resume. It doesn't need to be the final one you're submitting, and reaching out to your professors just to get their consent to see if they're interested in writing you one, and having that process begin early. Because again, similar to your transcript and your GPA, you can have all the other parts of your application ready but your letters of recommendation, depending on how busy folks are. And I'll tell you right now from personal experience that folks do get a lot busier during the application cycle in fall. So I'm talking September, October, November, and December. So the earlier you can kind of bank them and officially through the official LSAC portal, the easier of a chance you'll have when dealing with the other parts of your application you can control. So now let's talk about the things that you have authority over, the more flexible parts. And I think this is where you see a lot more substantive and qualitative forms of parts of your application. So we are talking about your personal statement and other supplemental essays, your resume, and your LSAT score. So your resume is obviously something that I feel like is kind of in that mystery zone between something you can control and you can't control, because oftentimes you'll have experiences spanning multiple years that you want to illustrate during your journey to law school. But obviously, this is something I feel like is very easy to do, but at the same time can be a common pitfall. There's a very standard way that law schools are expecting you to structure your resume and making sure that there's no grammatical errors. So you can easily go search up law school resume and the specific school you're applying to, and particularly, I'll direct folks to, I think Yale and Harvard Law School have great model resumes and templates that you can use just to make sure that you're not submitting something that detracts from your experiences and makes it easier for your recommenders to understand. So your experiences, obviously much longer time period, but in terms of the actual resume itself, you have a little bit more control about how it's formatted and the contents and how you structure things. And obviously, you can always come to the Career Center and talk to the wonderful folks there, like Marcy, a little bit more about how you can structure a resume and how you can best prepare that for graduate school and law school. Your personal statement and diversity statement, other supplemental essays, is I think probably going to be the largest portion of your application. Obviously, your application is holistic, which means your GPA, your score, your resume, and your personal statement are all taken into consideration when determining you'd be a good fit for a school or not. But your personal statement, and from my personal experience, and also from helping a lot of folks from UC San Diego applying, is going to take the longest amount of time. And that's primarily because it's very difficult choosing an experience or talking about why you want to go to law school. And I can speak for myself that I've had probably 11 to 12 iterations of my personal statement. And Marcy can attest to this because she's read over multiple versions of it. But you really want to give yourself enough time. I would say definitely more than a few months to start thinking about why it is that you want to go to law school and how. And I think one of the resources I'll kind of plug here and is the Navigating Law Schools podcast that's available online with the dean of admissions at Stanford, at Yale Law School and Harvard Law School, and they kind of talk about this in a 3-act structure where you want to allocate a certain portion of your personal statement talking about your past, how your past has informed your present, and how your past and your present is going to help you decide what you want to do in the future. And showing that type of movement and tying that into law school is a difficult task when it comes to first ideating what you want to write about. So I would recommend just giving yourself enough time. You don't need to put words down into a Word document or pen onto paper, but really start thinking about why you want to go to law school and why now. And tying that into your own lived experiences is going to give you a successful framework for your law school essay, for your personal statement. And obviously, finally, wrapping everything up, you have your LSAT score, which your experiences with the LSAT, your mileage may vary. I personally started with a low score when I first took my diagnosis exam. I think I was somewhere around the ballpark of 140, 142. And depending on how quickly you're able to pick up on the concepts, you might find that you can knock it out in a summer, or it might take a little bit longer. What I think is a general piece of advice that I give to everyone is that the LSAT is a lot more formulaic than folks think it is. So even though you have different sections, you have reading comprehension, you have logical reasoning, you'll find that there are common questions that get repeated over and over again, to the point where a lot of LSAT prep companies have come up with words to call this specific type of question a strengthened question or a weakened question or spotting a logical fallacy. So really, it's not just about taking exams and brute forcing it, but it's about figuring out what sections you're weak at and what question types you're the weakest at. And prioritizing which question types that you personally find difficult is going to help you really nail down on what challenges you have on the exam. And once you kind of have a bit more of that framework and understanding where your weaknesses are, I think that's when you can really focus your time onto the LSAT. Small piece of advice is, and I've met folks here that have done it this way. You can obviously prepare for the LSAT while you're working or while you're in school, but if you do have a summer coming up, I would highly recommend dedicating that time to not just the LSAT, but thinking about law school admissions, because you want to have enough time for you to percolate and ideate the ideas for your personal statement, but also not have distractions like going to work or having to prepare for final exams while preparing for the LSAT. So I know I just threw out a lot of words out here, so I'm just going to kind of bring it back, rein it back in by going back to our two buckets. So let's talk again very briefly about the things that are more difficult to control. And these are going to be long-term experiences, your GPA transcripts, and your letters of recommendation. And the things you do have more control over are obviously going to be your written statements, so personal statement, optional statements, your resume in terms of formatting, and your LSAT score. So thinking about those two things, when you actually do sit down to plan out what your next few months are going to look like before you apply to law school, think about what are some ways that you can knock out those things you can't control out of the park way early. Reach out to your professors early, reach out to your employers early, ask them if they're interested in doing a letter of recommendation, and send them an official request through the LSAC portal. Submit your transcript through LSAC as soon as possible so that you don't have to wait for delays. That way, you can get yourself a lot more time focusing on the things that do matter more in terms of how you have control over them. So, those are just my 2 cents. A bit of a long answer, but I hope it's helpful.
Gosh, that was so helpful. Thank you so much, Tommy. And I feel like the overarching theme of what you said to like narrow it down to one word is time. Because like you're saying, the more time that you give yourself to get the experiences you need for your resume, to build those relationships with professors, to have the time to really study and prepare for the LSAT is so important. And I feel that the quality of what you're going to be able to prepare in your statements, like you said, is huge difference in what I see. If somebody comes to me, I I actually love students that come to me freshman year that say, you know what, I have this vision that I want to do. Can you help me map it out? I mean, if somebody comes to me 6 months before, however, when they come, we can still map it out. But the bandwidth that we have to be able to really map it out is condensed greatly. And it's hard. Building relationships, as you know, especially with professors, takes time. And you want that to be reflected in your letter of recommendation. And I know we're going to go a little bit more into other myths and more will come up, but just working directly with admissions officers all the time, I think that a lot of people don't understand that whole process, like you're saying, the past, present, future, and how important it is for admissions officers to really feel who you are, not just what you do, but like who are you as a person. Like I love working with USC's Gould School of Law admissions. They had talked about that they want to feel that fire, like you're like it's got to feel like a true passion burning inside of you, because you've got to carry that fire through all of law school, right? So we're going to go a little bit more into those myths in a minute, but I really appreciate that. And I the reason we chose to do this video today is to ease the stress, right? And so to encourage students and alumni to map this out as soon as possible, to really to breathe during this process. So, and thank you, Tommy, again for really meeting with individual students and alumni too, because I think you can get wrapped up in knots sometimes in this process, and you need sometimes somebody to untangle the knots and then help you see the vision clearly. So, and the next part that we're going to move on to is dispelling the myths, because you and I continually hear things over and over again, and we know that comes a lot of times from the internet, like things out there. So let's go through some of the common myths, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit. But what would you say is like the first myth that you hear a lot?
I definitely think right off the top of my head, it's this idea that you need to have some sort of legal experience, whether that's being part of a pre-law organization or fraternity, being a paralegal, having a legal internship, doing moot court and mock trial before you are a competitive applicant for law school. And I personally think it's a pervasive myth and it's simply not true. I do think there is a correlation between folks who do mock trial, moot court, join pre-law organizations who maybe have thought about joining law school or going to law school much earlier. And I wouldn't disparage it in any way. There are a lot of folks in my class currently who have mock trial experience, who have worked as paralegals, and who have joined pre-law organizations in their undergrad to support their journey towards law school. But I also want to say that as long as you're able to answer the question, why do you want to go to law school with confidence in your application? You could come from any field, any background, any lived experience. And I think something that really stuck with me is this idea that admissions officers aren't simply applying a formula when they're looking at your application, but they're trying to craft a class that supports each other, that encourages each other's growing and education. So they want folks from a diverse range of backgrounds. And some examples that I'm just going to quickly throw out here. I actually know a lot of folks in my class currently who are older than graduating straight from college, and also are teachers. So they've either taught at Korea, taught in middle America, or other parts in the East Coast and the West Coast, and haven't touched paralegal work in the past before. I have a classmate in my small class who used to give tours in Yosemite, which I think is just a fascinating way to spend a couple of years before coming to law school. A lot of folks who've done direct service work in the form of social work or working in government policy. And personally, myself, I haven't touched anything related to either law school or paralegal work before I came to Berkeley. A big part of my experiences coming here had to do with student support and student governance. And that's something that really informed to me that I wanted more skills to be able to help other folks in my community. And I talked about how my past experiences as an orientation leader doing student advocacy work has informed my decision to go to law school. And obviously, I'm here now because admissions officers saw that. And even if I didn't quote unquote meet the common pervasive myth of needing to be a paralegal, needing to do moot court or mock trial, they found me to be a competitive applicant and decided to admit me to Berkeley. So again, I really think when you are thinking about applying to law school, you don't need to intentionally hamper yourself and think, oh, I need to get those legal experiences before I apply. I really think it's about looking at what you have and looking at your experiences and presenting it in a way where it answers the questions of the admissions officers. And that question is always going to be why law school and why now? And if you're able to do that successfully, you can apply to law school at any point without having what the quote unquote common checklist that people believe that they need.
That's perfect, Tommy. I totally agree. I feel that so often people come to me, what classes should I be taking? What should I be doing? And I have had every discipline come to me and apply to law school. And my answer to that is that your journey is uniquely your own. And that to me is your personal statement should be something that nobody else could write, right? And so that could come from anywhere. It could be that something happened in your childhood that really shaped you and like it's why you want to go. It could be a specific person that inspires you, right? It could be that I've had people completely change their focus because they were inspired by something that even happened while being at UCSD, right? And um, it could be that they just got passionate about being a part of a student organization. Maybe it could even be something like environmental law that they decided, you know what, this is the area I really want to make an impact in. So um, I always say that admissions officers actually don't care what you study or what you do, as long as it's something that you're passionate about and challenges you. So I think that when we share these kind of things with students and alumni, they can relax and they can just be themselves and go to their own why. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Tommy. I feel like that is a really important myth to dispel. Is there so what is the next myth that you see?
So I think this is a conversation I've been getting more recently, especially as we've seen before shakedowns in the US news rankings and other, I guess, ways of ranking law school prestige. But I do think there's a bit of a confusion when it comes to deciding what law school to actually attend or when to apply. Obviously, there are few law schools in the United States that are considered best, which are often dubbed as the T14 because these were schools that were ranked by US News as a top 14 consistently throughout the past few decades. But I want to throw out a couple of things out here in terms of what you should be thinking about, or some decision factors, either when you're deciding to apply to law school or when you have a couple of options to choose from and you're trying to figure out what law school to actually attend. So I want to throw it out here that we've seen a massive upheaval when it comes to US news rankings in the past 3 years. I don't know if folks were connected with what happened last year and 2 years ago, but essentially there was a bit of a protest by top law schools when it came to how US News calculated their rankings. And what this led to is a new formula that they adapted last year that significantly changed for some schools. And I'm talking here about schools being ranked 17 slots above or schools dropping down 25 below. Nothing changing, by the way, about how they run their operations, quality of their education, the outcome of their graduates, simply by the fact that US News Ranking adopted a new formula. Some schools were now being massively shifted up and massively shifted down. And I think this just really highlights to the fact that, yes, to a degree, that there is a degree of prestige that comes to going to law school, especially law schools that were considered by the legal profession as top law schools in the past. But the US News Ranking is by no means a definitive, nor should it be a truly reputable source of your outcome after you graduate. And kind of segueing into that, I think there's a couple of things that folks should be thinking about more concretely when deciding to apply or to accept an offer from a certain school. So something that I don't really see a lot of folks take advantage of is the Law School Admissions Council and also the ABA requires every single law school to submit a form called the 509 informational report. And you can access this very simply by searching up 509, name of the law school that you're applying to or you're considering from. And what this will give you is it's a very comprehensive list of data. And I've just quickly pulled up Berkeley laws on my screen here. And this gives you pretty much all of your LSAT, GPA, medians, and quartiles for generations. So 2023, for example, the admitted class. It also gives you, for example, the average salary of folks who graduate. So 25 percentile, the median, and 75 percentile, the full-time, part-time status, how much scholarship is doled out. This is going to be a much more comprehensive and realistic look at the financial components of a law school instead of looking at the US News rankings. So the 509 report, I think, is a great resource to think a little bit more about your outcome, right? And your access to opportunities. I do think a big part of thinking about a legal education, it should be the financial cost. And there are schools that offer generous aid packages and there are schools that don't. And oftentimes a generous financial aid package of six figures might actually be less generous when you take into account the cost of attendance of a certain area or a certain school. So as much as I wish it wasn't this way, because law school is an investment and it is a financial risk to a certain degree, I would really encourage folks to look at these 509 reports and think carefully about what your financial risk is. Can you take on this much debt? Are there resources that are available at a certain law school that can help pay off that debt? A lot of law schools, for example, are now allowing you to take on public interest positions or public service positions and will have a program that works in with the public service loan forgiveness program with the federal government. So, for example, at Berkeley, you can make anywhere between $80,000 to $120,000, and Berkeley law will pay for your loan repayments up to 10 years. So if you make below a certain amount, or if you're going into a field that potentially isn't making as much money as a big law position, you don't have to worry about the large debt burden. And if you are able to keep that up for 10 years, then you can supposedly or hypothetically pay off your entire debt without making a single payment through Berkeley law. So that's more of the financial portions of thinking about what law school you should be going to. But the second thing I want to talk about is your access to opportunities. I do think there is a point to be made that if you go to a law school that has a certain level of prestige, you'll have easier access to opportunities compared to law schools that might have more regional influence. But that clearly doesn't mean that you should take the highest ranked school, or quote unquote highest ranked school that you get to. You should be thinking about what you really want to do after you graduate. Are you interested in doing public interest work? Do you want to go into a large corporate law firm? Do you want to work in a government? Or do you want to work in the federal government, the state government, or local government? All these questions, and obviously you don't need to write in your personal statement that you commit to a certain field, but you need to have a bit of a tolerance and a preference for what you want to do with your law degree. And I'm sure a lot of folks who are currently watching this video right now have a general idea of why you want to go to law school and what type of career you'd like. So if you are thinking about, for example, I think a bold example is clerking for the Supreme Court. Going to a prestigious university is obviously going to give you a leg up when searching for those positions. But even being at Berkeley Law, I can tell you right now that there's a lot of folks who want to go to a big law firm that would have been able to get access to the same opportunities if they had attended a different school. So think about considering the finance or holding the financial components, I guess, standard or as a control variable. Think about how that relates to your access to opportunities. So is the financial burden that you're going to be taking on if you're going to a much more expensive school going to be worth it in terms of what opportunities you're going to be able to have as a student and as a graduate? And I think thinking about those things, where you want to work, what type of work you want to do, how much that you're willing to take on, is really what should be going into your mind when thinking about what law school you're going to apply to and what your law school you're going to attend, rather than simply relying on the US News rankings.
Perfect, Tommy. Wow. I mean, I feel like we're living in like the frequently asked questions page of like what I hear every day. Like just this week, I probably had that question multiple times. So, and I really appreciate, I think there is this huge myth around the financial aid piece, and you're a testament to that part. Like I literally this week had somebody say, I have to go to this prestigious school and I'm just going to have to figure out how to pay off the loans. So I actually shared with that person your story about how you did apply to many different schools and that you actually leveraged a financial aid package that you received to get a very, what do I want to say, excellent financial package at Berkeley. And people go, I have had so many people say to me, you can do that? And so do you want to talk a little bit about your process in terms of applying and negotiation, right?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Marcy, there's somebody at my door, so can I be back in about 30 seconds or so?
Of course.
I'll be back very.
I'll keep talking while you're gone. Yeah, so well, Tommy will be back, but yeah, that's a big question I get in terms of the negotiation, the financial aid package. Another big question that I know Tommy will back me up with as well is the fact that early decision, right, is a very big area that people will ask about. And that is definitely a decision to weigh. But there are some pros and cons to that in terms of negotiating financial aid. So I don't know if you heard that, my little filler, Tommy, while you were gone. Did you hear what I said or no?
I could use a bit of a refresher
Okay, no
if you're
worries.
willing to offer.
I was just saying that on that note, I was also talking about early decision and the pros and cons to doing that as it comes to financial aid as well. So maybe you could fill in your story a little bit about why you chose not to do early decision and why there are some benefits to that if you do choose that, and also your story of your application process and the financial aid piece of that. So thanks, Tommy.
Of course, of course. So just as a general point, I applied to 20 law schools, which I would not recommend other folks do, which you'll find that when you're applying to multiple law schools, that there are common application materials that are shared, such as your personal statement, your resume. But a lot of law schools do want you to write something extra or give you an opportunity to write something extra. As for example, Berkeley Law, Michigan allows you to write a why Michigan or why Berkeley statement. And obviously, I'm more in the side of if you have the time, you should reveal as much information as possible to the admissions committee. So it was a very long process for me to write multiple supplements for, I'd say probably about 10 schools. But regardless of that aside, I think there's a lot of merit when it comes to thinking about the aid offers that you're going to receive and in how that relates to the school that you're going to be choosing. So in my particular situation, I received several different packages of varying lengths, of varying amounts. And the most competitive offer I found was from Michigan that had offered me $120,000, which was not the highest amount that I received, but it was the most compelling offer that I had. And obviously, Berkeley Law at the time when I first got in had not offered me that much. So I took Michigan's offer and used that to kind of leverage to a higher aid amount. And actually, since I have the opportunity here, it's something I'll kind of mention is there's a lot of schools of thought when it comes to choosing how many schools you should apply to. And I think there's merit to really focusing on schools that you would really like to attend because you might want to apply. There's folks who apply to a lot of schools, I guess, in my situation, because I wanted to see what aid offers I can get and to see if I could leverage up to a higher amount. But it's really difficult to make a compelling argument on why you want to attend a particular law school, even if they offer you a full ride, for example, if you don't really want to go to that school. And the reason why I chose Michigan for my aid negotiation is because I wanted to go to Michigan and Berkeley at the same time. And I was able to write a very comprehensive essay arguing why Michigan was a great school for me, but why Berkeley was more attractive to me. But the fact that I was receiving less aid made it more difficult for me to take on that risk as somebody who wanted to do more public interest work. So and I've unfortunately lost my train of thought. But Marcy, what was the other question that you had asked while I tried to
And
bring back that?
thank you for framing that because I also get the question a lot, how many law schools should I apply to? And I definitely think that 8 to 12 is the typical range. I definitely do not recommend 20 because I do remember you coming with your like notepad and like all these check boxes, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think you won the record for the most law school. So thanks for having that experience. So we can share to other people to not do that to themselves. Also, because we go back to the time again, the key theme here and quality, because it's like, I think a lot of students don't understand like the supplemental essays and how important it is to do them and how much extra time that those do take as well. So I really appreciate you hitting on those important points. And then the other part was early decision versus regular decision.
Yes, perfect. So as Marcy kind of brought up, I was very much considering to applying to Berkeley Law with a early decision application, and I decided against it. I think one of the more attractive things for me is this law school process is stressful. It is onerous, and there's I think, physical burden to it in the time that you put in, and obviously preparing for the LSAT. But there's a very massive mental burden comes to waiting for decisions, putting in the time to working on an application, and not really knowing what school you're going to be attending or whether you're going to be able to attend a school in the future at all. And that was one of the more compelling reasons why I wanted to apply early decision. There's, I think, I wouldn't say a myth, but there is a theory out there that's also shared by admissions officers that when you do apply early, it shows first you are committed to attending that school if you get in because it is a binding offer. And second, that you'll be competing against or quote unquote competing against a smaller pool of applicants because there's less folks who do apply early decision. And some schools finally do offer you a significant or moderate amount of financial aid when it comes to applying early decision and getting accepted. But I think there's the flip side of it where it's great if you have that conviction that you want to attend a particular school. And I won't discourage folks who do have that conviction, who regardless of the amount financial aid amount that you get, you really need to attend this school. Then early decision might be the right move for you. But when it comes to how much information you have as an applicant versus being an admitted student, there is so much that is different. When you do have the option of going to admitted students weekend, which actually is currently happening right now at Berkeley, or talking to students who are currently part of certain law school, getting to meet other applicants and getting a sense for what the class is going to look like. These are all things that you cannot do when you're applying early decision to a particular law school. So what really persuaded me against it is just simply the fact that I would have less options, and I would also just have more information after I had applied when deciding what law school I would decide to attend. And I want to quickly throw out here that even if you do decide to apply early decision, there are times that you might not get accepted. And in that case, your application will be bumped down to a regular decision or regular cycle application regardless. So I would say there are benefits to applying early, but there's also a lot of restrictions. So if you're someone who doesn't have that true burning passion for a certain school and has a lot of financial resources or is willing to take on a lot of risk to attend a particular school, even if they don't have an incentive to offer you aid, I would consider early decision. But I don't think there's any skin off your back by just applying a regular decision, carefully considering the options that you have and watching what happens. You might find yourself that you might get lucky and similar to me, where you are able to leverage aid from a certain school and are able to receive more than you would have if you were applying early decision. So those are just my 2 cents on the topic there.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommy. That's comes up all the time. So I think we have time for one more myth because I want to leave a little time at the end to talk about support because I feel like that is ending on that note of how students and alumni can receive support is super important. So what one last myth do you feel like is comes up all the time?
I think by far it has to be what information is available online when it comes to the law school admissions process. And there's different flavors. There's Reddit, the law school admissions subreddits particularly. There are I'm also going to lump in advice by other students who are applying to law school in the same cycle as you are, and websites that aggregate student submitted data, such as law school data, or LSD as it's commonly called. These resources, or I'm going to say quote unquote resources, are simply created by the fact that the law school admissions process is a black box. Not much is known about what happens inside the minds or the processes of application reviewers and admissions officers. And that I feel like has a catalyzing effect when it comes to how students respond to that. And the most natural way you respond to that is by talking to other folks who are in the similar situation as you are. So these forums, these websites, or even just your peers really are looking for some sort of assurance or reading tea leaves to try and figure out what's going to happen with your application. And I really want to highlight here to think very critically about where your information is coming from. If you are talking to someone who is in the exact same shoes as you are, which is going to be the case with Reddit, there are folks who are going to say that they're more experienced than they are, but they're going to offer no proof. There's going to be folks who can claim that they have a higher statistics, better LSAT score, GPA, without any proof either. And what they can offer you as a person in terms of concrete information. And the answer most of the time is going to be nothing or very little. And this is simply by the fact that so it's a bit of a circular cycle I see because there's not much information known about the law school admissions process. Folks create a space to talk about them or to try and predict them, which then also leads back to the fact that not that many folks know about the law school admissions process. I so harkening back a little bit to what I had mentioned before about how this is a mental battle too, because there's a lot of uncertainty involved with the law school admissions process. I would generally discourage folks from turning to Reddit or to other user submitted forums or user submitted websites as a credible source of information. And primarily too, it's going to help protect your peace as well. And this is something I preach, but I did not do when I was applying for the cycle. I was very much active in law school data, in the subreddit law school admissions, and it really took a big toll on me because I got notification that, oh, somebody who applied to the same school as I did just got into it just got accepted or rejected or waitlisted. I didn't get an offer back. Is there something wrong with my application?
Mm,
Am I not as strong as an applicant? Am I not as strong as an applicant as somebody who's faceless I have no information about? And that is not something I would really wish on my worst enemy either. And I don't think it gives you there's an illusion of that helping you kind of figure out, oh, this is about the time that I'm going to get my answer back. But really, when it comes down to it, the law school admissions process takes a long time because it is not formulaic. And any
mhm,
attempt, I feel like, to try and read the tea leaves is going to give you, if it gives you a sense of security, is going to give you a false sense of security. What I feel like is a much better use of your time is really trying to figure out what type of life you want to strike when you do go to law school and when you graduate. And there are certain things that you're not able to do when you first get here. For example, do you have any hobbies or are there things that you find important? Values, quality time with your partner, with your family members that you're not willing to compromise on? And how does that fit into a potentially rigorous job? Does it make you happy to work in a place where you're challenged, or would you rather work in a place where maybe you get a little less financial compensation, but you have a bit better of a work-life balance? What type of work would truly make you happy when you go to law school? Because most of the time after you go to law school, surprise, surprise, you're probably going to be an attorney after you graduate. So so my advice again to kind of tie everything together, take things with a heaping spoonful of salt. If you see it online, offered to you for free. And the more confident somebody is about the admissions process, the more skeptical you should be in terms of what they're willing to share online, because you don't know anything about what they have to actually give them credibility and also to show that they know what they're talking about. And I don't think there's ever been a case of admissions officer disguising as a prospective applicant and going onto Reddit to share about all the deep dark secrets about how the admissions process works. And I will probably bet a significant amount of money that's never going to happen as the law school's admissions process is alive. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you so much, Tommy. I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, I think it'll be a good segue over to the support piece. But before we go over there, I just wanted to say, yes, I've had people come to me in full on panic about Reddit, and then they come to you in full on panic about Reddit. And I think a big myth too that a lot of students and alumni don't realize is the importance of also going to info sessions at the schools that you're interested in, learning about what's important to them, because one school may value something differently than another school. And so understanding that for not only your application, but also for you, right? Like what's important to you? Is this school resonate with me, right? So, and also making connections with admissions, right? Like sometimes schools even offer admissions appointments. And that's also things that students and alumni say all the time. I can connect with admissions. And I'm like, absolutely building those relationships with admissions officers, visiting schools if you can, because it's also something may look good on a website or paper, but you may get to a campus and it may not feel like the right fit if that's possible for people. So I really appreciate you saying that. Also, the podcasts of like listening to what admissions officers have to say in there, because that's coming. I always say, go get the information straight from the horse's mouth, right? Like, got to get it straight from them. So, and so back to the topic of support before we wrap up, I really, really appreciate that you brought that up, because taking care of your well being and your mental health in this process is really important, and reaching out for the support of, I think a lot of students don't realize like how the UCSD Career Center is here to help with the planning process, to actually help with essays, to help make connections to alumni who have offered to help, like yourself, Tommy. So, and Triton's Connect, they can find alumni to connect to. LinkedIn, they could even search the school they're looking for and UCSD and look for alumni that are there. So there's so many areas to get support. There's even the writing hub on campus that can help with like grammar and like the flow of your essay as well. So I wanted to turn it over to you, Tommy, to talk about like, the support you received and like any tips that you have around that. And I know you're going to close this out with a nice little gem.
Of course. And I think I'll kind of start with that anecdote that popped up for me this week and really stuck with me as I was preparing for this talk. So a few days ago, I had a chance to moderate a symposium on affirmative action with the Asian American Law Journal. And one of our speakers was a attorney who had worked for the government for multiple years, for over a decade, with a very seasoned and celebrated career, but who also held a MFA from uh, CUNY while she was also working for the government, and had dipped her toes into writing poetry and sharing a little bit more about her experiences of being a lawyer. And I have the book right here that I bought from the symposium. But one of the poems that she shared with everyone who was present was her experiences applying for law school. And there's a very vivid poem included here about how in 1993, she's running across the campus, trying to get into a van that's going to drive her to the nearest LSAT administration test center that's 3 hours away. And the anxiety that she felt being on that van, not being prepared whatsoever because nobody had told her that there are resources available for her, and being late to the exam administration center. And the only way that she was able to take the exam that day is because of a test proctor who were looking for the 5 missing people that weren't present when the test had started. And the poem kind of goes on to talk about how nobody really thought of her as a competitive applicant and didn't give her that advice. And so she had to go through that experience alone. And it really stood out to me because this is exactly how I felt when I was first applying for law school, or when I was first thinking about applying for law school much earlier in 2018, 2019. And obviously, it was an on and off experience for me, but this I feel like is the biggest and most pervasive myth, is that you need to do this alone because it's a competitive process. And I don't think that's true whatsoever. I would not be at Berkeley if it wasn't for the fact that there was this UC San Diego alum who is currently a 3L at Berkeley, who took time during finals week to text me very detailed descriptions of what their class environment was like. And I haven't met a single person who does not respond well to a alumni of their college reaching out to hear more about what their experiences are like and what their application process is like. You are not alone when it comes to this process. And I think the reason why I like to do this work, and the reason why Marcy loves to do this work too, is because we want to make sure that you're not alone. There's so many resources that are available out there. Like Marcy mentioned, admissions officers are putting things out, reputable facts about what their thought process is like. The A to Z podcast with the Dean of Admissions at Michigan Law School, the Navigating Law Schools podcast from Yale and from Harvard. Folks who are willing to put information out there to demystify and to make sure that you understand what they're looking for. The Career Center, folks like Marcy, wonderful folks like Marcy, and student tutors and other folks who are willing to review your personal statement, your resume. And obviously folks more like me at law schools all across the country who would love to grab a cup of coffee or to have a phone call to talk a little bit more about what it's like to be an actual law student. And that's really the takeaway that I want you to have is we don't bite. We want to see you succeed. And reach out to us if you have any questions about the law school admissions process, because the last thing I can think about as being an attorney in the future is I would never want to pull up the ladder after I had climbed up it. All I want to do is put more ladders down, because that's ultimately the only way that we're going to see more Tritons at law schools all across the United States doing great work, the work that you deserve to do.
Thank you so much, Tommy. That was beautiful. And thank you for ending on the note of, sharing your offer to help, your continued offer to help, and for letting students and alumni know they're not alone. So yes. And if you're a current student or a recent grad within the last 6 months, you can sign up in Handshake to meet with me. You can do a pre-law prep, and we also provide law school application support. So we look forward to seeing you and supporting you on your journey. Thanks again, Tommy.
Of course, and have a great whatever time of the day, everyone.